Yaama. I always think about there is a difference between the truth and the colonial lie. You see, when it comes to colonizers, I'll start with for a second. When colonizers say anything, due to their colonial nature and their colonial actions, how is it that it's believable, anything that they say or anything that they say that they have done? Because even when it comes to what is deemed as history, when colonizers look at history, they flick straight through the pages of a book, which is very different from First Nations, but we'll get there. But when colonizers look at history, they flick through books that were written obviously by their colonial forefathers, their colonial ancestors. And they take that as gospel. Now, again, from a colonial point of view or perspective, colonizers are never about the truth. From my perspective, colonizers are always about what is in it for them, and that's why you see the narrative always heading down the avenue of whether it's making excuses, whether it's accountability. It's always going down that avenue of protecting basically what colonizers have acquired at the expense of First Nations peoples. And then when it comes to the truth, when we're talking about First Nations, first you have to understand that First Nations are not in a position, they are not to gain or to lose anything by telling the truth. And that is why I believe that First Nations are the accurate source of truth and what is called history. Now, yes, colonizers may have utilized this word history as in his story. But anyway, that's for another day. But yeah, in terms of truth, that First Nations peoples, the indigenous peoples of the land, are the most accurate source of truth. And this is also congruent with our natural law, and as it comes to mind, I want to give you an example. When it comes to a tree, for example, people have understood that they could tell how old the tree is by when it, if you cut it, the rings on the tree can tell you how old it is. But not just that. The rings on the tree could actually tell you about the season. It could tell you about the lived experiences, as it were, of the tree. For example, some of the rings may be darker, some may be lighter, which may allude to the weather being hotter, or the weather being colder, or that it experienced a certain thing at a certain time. That is equivalent to First Nations, to indigenous peoples. Because again, First Nations peoples are not of that mindset to manipulate to an advantage. First Nations peoples, indigenous peoples, just are. They're a part of the environment. They are constrained by a law that the Creator has put in place, and we stick by it. So I just thought I'd bring you this to think about when it comes to that there is a truth and that there is a colonial lie, and it's very blatantly obvious. So in terms of First Nations case here, you have European British that are now called Australians that attempt to run a romanticized story of history. They attempt to run a sugar-coated version of history. They attempt to run, certain narratives trying to say, oh yeah, but they would not have what they have today if it wasn't for us. We give them this, this and this. We lived together, creating AI images of First Nations child and a European child together, and saying this is how we grew up. Well, again, that's not the case, because there is a truth and there is a lie, and the best source of truth comes from First Nations, Indigenous sources of information. That's where the truth comes from, and not just here, but right around the world. So I'll leave this with you, mob. Yellow.